Hello, awesome people. Hope you're having an awesome day. As you've probably seen from the title, this episode 18, will be the last episode of this season. And so, if you've listened to the previous few episodes, you would have known that I mentioned that I had around like 10 guest episodes that I haven't edited and uploaded, and that number has not decreased yet. So I have now currently around like 20 guest episodes that I have yet to edit. So I know I've said that I would upload more of the guest episodes soon, but I've decided to upload like some of my solo episodes first and record some because I do miss podcasting solo, and so I'll upload those guest episodes into season 2. So that is because like school has ended for me and I've entered summer break, and so I'll be taking some rest and I'll be visiting my relatives outside of Hong Kong. So my podcasting schedule would not quite be the same, and it might change a bit. And for those who are confused to why I have separate seasons instead of like cumulative episodes, it's because I just think it would be easier for listeners to listen to, and it would also just personally be a lot more easier for me to just organize. But if you don't like the seasonal format, I could also add the cumulative episode number if you guys want that. So as you can see, I'm coming solo today because I've had a few guests for the last few episodes, and I want to reflect and like talk about what this podcast has meant for me independently, as like I'm the one who knows this podcast the best, and I know this podcast inside and out. So I'll be talking mainly about the purpose of this podcast, like the meaning of this podcast and why I created it, and not really my mental health. I don't really want to talk about my mental health for now. So yeah, I'll just letting you guys know what this episode would be about and how much this podcast has meant for me and how much I hope it helps. So first of all, for those who are new here, you wouldn't know that I've started my mental health journey pretty early on. So I'll probably say when I was like 8 or 9. But during that time, I didn't notice the changes in my behavior, and I didn't even pay that much attention to my mental health compared to my physical health. So when I really finally like realized that my mental health was down bad basically and like was declining, I would be basically in my teenage years, which is really just a few years ago. So this is also really one of the main purposes I started this. It's really for younger kids to learn about mental health the same way that they would learn about their physical health. And that's just basically for them to be able to know and understand the importance of mental health, basically. So during my lowest, darkest, stormiest, my worst days, I recorded myself basically venting and ranting basically about my frustrations and the difficulties I was facing. And so after those lowest, darkest, stormiest, worst days, I I just one day stumbled upon them, and like that was like a few years after I recorded those on my darkest days, and I got this wonderful idea to basically just put them into use and to actually like get something from them. So that is how this podcast was basically born. So a lot of my episodes are basically from like, especially my first few episodes had parts of my old recordings in it, which is quite funny because like I don't know if you guys noticed, but my voice didn't really change that much. And I mean, a lot of the episodes were based on ideas I wrote down on those days, on my worst days. And yeah, I've found that really useful because sometimes when I reflect back on those days when I was really struggling, I can't really remember a lot of it, and for me to have like recorded some of it, it's really useful. So if you're here during the start of my podcast, you would have listened to my first episode, and you would have been introduced to the acronym of TRAP, TRAP, which I made. And so that is something I made up to basically use to help myself to handle like panic attacks and anxiety problems and nervousness basically. And so that is something I have personally used before. before I created this podcast. And so that's one of like the examples of how I have used like my life and my difficulties to basically share my journey about like mental health and how this could help other people. So yeah, other than that, like I just want to talk about what this podcast has meant for me basically, and what I hope it means for you guys. So sometimes I don't know if it's just for me, but if it's for other podcasters, I don't know. But sometimes I'm really not quite sure what this podcast means for me and why I'm really here making this podcast. And sometimes for me, it's really easy to record. Like sometimes I can just open my recorder and just record and say whatever I want. And sometimes I have to write down notes to stay on track, and sometimes I need to write a script. Like today, I actually feel quite good, so I'm just talking right now and I feel quite good, but sometimes I really can't do that. And sometimes I have like multiple takes. Like I remember for my first few episodes, I had to tape it like 5 or 7 or even 10 times, and that's a really long time. Sometimes I get really frustrated, and for me, I hate writing scripts. I've said it many times and I'll say again that for podcasting, for me it's like having conversation, and it's like sharing a story or like telling a story, and I'm not forcing information on you, right? You can turn this episode off, you can turn the volume down, you can listen to some Spotify playlist of yours, and you can play some YouTube video, or you can watch Stranger Things because like that's what people seems to be talking about nowadays. But you're here listening to me talk about talking, and now I'm basically talking, and yeah, I'm talking. So yeah, you get the point. But basically, this podcast has done so much for me. It has entered me into magazines, it has like invited me into interviews, and I've been submitted into competitions, but most of all, it has taught me mental health. And that sounds very, very vague, but that's the range of knowledge that I've really personally gained from like creating this podcast. And that's like from researching like before solo episodes, and to improvising and making up questions on the spot with guest episodes. And so with that, I've met like a lot of people with really interesting experiences, and they all have their own different unique story. And this podcast has done so much for me, and I can just remember when I was having a really bad day, and this podcast served as like a distraction for me while I can really just take my mind off things and just do something I enjoy. And also when I was bored or maybe really nervous, I could just like take a walk and like walk my dog while thinking of new content and new episodes. And but after all, after what I've said, podcasters wouldn't be podcasting on their lowest, darkest, stormiest, worst days without you guys. I don't know a lot of you guys, and I don't know really who listens to my episodes. I don't know if you guys are teenagers or elderly, or I just really don't know any of you guys, but I just know that you guys are out there, and I can see through my analytics how many of you guys and how many people watches my episodes. I don't know your account or your names because of course it's anonymous, but I can see the numbers. I can see how many of you guys actually listen to my episodes, and they're not just numbers to me because all the numbers represent my listeners, and all of you guys are people to me, and all of you guys are very important to me because you guys are basically listening to me share my story, and that's very important to me. And like that's from 50 listeners from when I just started to hundreds, and now to thousands of listeners. I can see how many of you guys follow my newsletter on my website, and how many of you guys download my episodes, and how many of you guys listen to me talk basically. So what I'm trying to say is it really just thank you, and thank you for making this so amazing. Thank you for these few very, very fun months, and I just really hope it would continue being this fun in the future. And really, thank you for letting me wake up to all of your wonderful comments that you've sent me. And it's honestly been great. And it's also worth mentioning that along with the comments, I've also received questions. And so I'll answer those in a few months. And so basically, there's not a lot much more to say. I created this podcast mainly to spread my view and my knowledge on mental health with all of you guys and my perspective as a teen. And in return, you guys have also shared your stories with me too. And I share my story because mental health is not really black and white. And we all have our mental health to deal with, and it's really, really, really hard to deal with it alone. And so for me, really like what I just said, mental health is not black and white. It's not really that simple. It's not solely science. Humans are not yet to really the point where we can just cure depression and dump away flashbacks and panic attacks from eating a single pill and or from just reading a scientific textbook or something like that. Sure, meds can like decrease the intensity of your symptoms, but they are not yet fully gone. So there will be people like me out here who would try out some of my advice that I share on this podcast and some of my techniques, and it would like help them. But there are also some of y'all who would try my stuff out and it would just not work. Um so all I'm saying is that we all deal with it differently. It's all different for all of us. And it's also important for me and for you guys to know that we're all very, very different. And at the end of the day, you're just yourself, and you can't compare yourself with me, and I can't compare myself with you, because at the end of the day, I'm just a teen, and I started taking like this podcast really seriously and uploading consistently, basically like every Wednesday when I was 13. And so now, after all, I'm just 14, and as you can tell from my terrible, terrible jokes, and like it's not important, but I would just like to say that it's actually raining outside, so sorry if the audio's like it's just the background noise. It's just a little annoying, but it's 2 a.m. right now, and I'm recording this because I can't sleep. So all I guess I'm saying is that we're all human, and we have to know that we are human, and I assume no dogs are listening to this. So yeah, we're all just human. We're not invincible, and none of us are like Spider-Man or Superman, I hope. And it's normal to be sad. It's okay to be not okay, and it's fine to not feel fine. And for me, I'm just someone who loves podcasting, but I also have my bad days like all of you. I feel really sad sometimes, I feel really nervous sometimes, and I don't feel the best at times. But there is really no happy without sad, and there's no good without bad, and no pleasure without pain. So there's no bad things without good things, and no good things without bad things. So I guess what I'm saying is that there has to be bad for the good to come out. And so after all, we're all just humans, and we all have our bad days. And I might just hope I can help with you, and I can help you with your journey, even if it's just a tiny, tiny bit. So, as usual, before we end this, I would like to remind you to please reach out for help if you need it. Please talk to a trusted adult if you're feeling down or unwell. You can also call crisis hotlines, and if you're in an emergency, please call your local emergency services. Of course, you can talk to me for a chat or for some teenage advice, but I'm not trained and not professional, so I would suggest talking to an adult or a professional in that area first. Please do not hesitate to seek help. Before we finish this episode, I would just like to say thank you for listening, and if you're listening on Spotify, you can add your suggestions, feedback in my Instagram bio. And I've started to share some mental health tips and share some updates on my website and also on my newsletter, in which you can subscribe to. So I have also started preparing for an episode where we'll read out your confessions and any questions you have on mental health. So if you would like to submit one, please go to my website, which you can see on my podcast bio in all my platforms I am live on. And lastly, if you're interested about my guest episodes, please go to my website to find more about that. So I hope that helps. Thank you for listening. I hope you listen to my other episodes and I hope you have an awesome day. Bye!